How you doing? Hello everybody and welcome back to the Educated Clone Snap channel. We've got our OTA today released by second editor. We are targeting a lot of good meta cards, good compositions that are not the season pass card as they like to do. But I think overall there are some pretty good changes that will affect the meta, so got a lot to talk about. Let's get started. Alright, so we do have a couple of interesting changes today. First off, we will be talking about, not Alioth, though we will talk about that. We'll be talking about Forge. Forge is the first nerf, I would say, here. So, well, it's a nerf, but it's closer to an adjustment than a nerf, where they're moving it from a 2-1 to a 1-1. But they're giving the power +2 instead of +3. So this does mean that you can play it in more like floody decks. It's essentially a 1-3 with upside. So that's not too bad. It does kind of really make the Brood, the Forge Brood Absorbing Men combo a little bit worse, but that combo is too strong anyway. So I think it's fine to nerf this a little bit. You could still play it in the same deck and it still works. It's just you're losing 3 power. So that is something to consider. I do think that combo was too strong, so I'm fine with this change. It does mean that Bounce can now like take this and really run with it. So you could definitely play Forge in a Bounce deck if you want. There's definitely a lot of good targets there. So, but I think Bounce already has a lot of good targets anyways. But they're just giving more targets for Bounce, which is fine. You know, Bounce has a pretty decent resurgence right now. It's also good into Mysterio, right? So Forge Mysterio is pretty powerful. It was powerful before, but it wasn't clean in that they were both 2-drops. Here it's clean. You play Forge on 1, Mysterio on 2. You're getting a lot of power for that. So there's definitely some good play patterns with this card. So I don't think this card is going to fall out of meta or anything like that. I just think it's gonna be played a little different. You can still play in the same deck. So overall, I'm fine with this change. Definitely think Forge Brood was crazy anyway. So I'm just yeah, this needed to happen already. Let's see what they have to say about it. So it's been fun. It's been real. It's been real fun. But ultimately, Forge was a little too good at dealing out power. That's very true with Brood. Because the card is pretty enjoyable on both sides. And the issue is really just the raw amount of power. We decided to move it down to 1-1 and +2. Fair enough. This makes Sinister clean curve play. And makes Forge slip to a variety of easy combos. But reducing the ceiling of how much power you can make. Okay. We'll keep an eye on whether this makes Forge dangerous in conjunction with Beast and Falcon. So yeah, they're aware of Bounce. We're optimistic that those decks will be fun for the meta game. I mean, Bounce decks are fun, I guess. They have a lot of thought process in them, which is my criteria of whether a deck is interesting, if you have to think a lot, or if it's I just play my cards and Alioth will win at the end, that kind of thing. But yeah, okay, with this change, it's the right direction. Next card we all talk about will be for sure Alioth. So this card has been, what's the word? This card has been terrorizing the meta in terms of it's been so good, so prevalent that it changes the way you play. You really care about having priority, and it's so powerful that people just play it in any deck. I definitely see it in the most random decks that don't make any sense. Well, it makes some sense if it's a deck that can get priority, but it's not a deck you would traditionally think, oh yeah, this Alioth card, yeah, this deck card goes in. But it's just a card that can win so easily that it just makes sense to have it as an option. So they're doing a pretty big nerf to it, where it's going from a 6-5 to a 6-3. I will say that if Alioth wins the game, it still wins the game, right? And that's the idea, right? You don't want it to be unplayable, but it does win a lot. In scenarios where it wins, where your opponent is playing into the same lane you are, where if you're playing lockdown or anything like that, it just wins regardless. So it's still the same idea. However, you do have to have a little bit more power, a little bit more of a break point. It's not easy to always be winning by 3 or 4 power. So it does hurt. It does make things like Doctor Doom a lot better into it. So seems like a nerf. I guess I'm okay with it. There's definitely gonna be some people very happy about this being changed. I did like the priority switch that it did bring, and there's also a lot less Shang-Chi. There's still Shang-Chi, but there was less of it with this card in the meta since you cared about priority, and Shang-Chi doesn't really do that. So, we'll have to see if this card is still playable, if this card is still super popular, but it is a pretty effective nerf. Because you can still play the way it was designed, but there's going to be more answers to it. Movement decks already had a really good matchup into this, and now it's going to have an even better matchup, right? Jeff is a pretty good counter now, which is maybe a little too good. Like a 6/4 seems fine to me, but whatever. Like maybe it was just like too good. But yeah, you could like let's say you're tying a lane, you just move Jeff they play a lie. Well, you've tied the lane anyway. So it's definitely weaker, and I do think the priority of this card is going to go down a lot. However, in lockdown decks and stuff like that, it's still going to be pretty decent. So we'll just have to see if this breakpoint makes it like not as appealing as it was before. So Allied's been out for a while, and the impact of the metagame in a big way. We expect Allied to see playing a lot of different decks, prioritizing 6-cost cards, while also pushing the metagame to reward playing the board more aggressively. I feel like they didn't do that. I feel like they just created the card and they're like, wow, look at what Alliance did. We did that. We thought about that. We're geniuses. That's how I feel with that statement here. Which in turn Riku Shang-Chi. And indeed that all came to pass. Players are jockeying for the right to reveal first much more often, whereas in the past metagames was often the exact opposite. True. That said, Alliance play rate is touched too high due to how easily it slots in many decks. So you can put in anything, and 5 power is proven to be a tough breakpoint for some countermeasures like Doombot. Yeah, I mean, Doombot is still a good counter even at 5 power, because as long as you can play in the right lanes, you're going to be contesting there. And if you can put 5 power in 2 lanes and you don't win in the last turn, like that's kind of on you. I feel like you're not doing that much. However, I still think Allied deserved the nerf, so I just think like 6/5 to 6/3 is a lot. So we'll have to see how that feels. You definitely have to be correct with the guessing. You have to make sure you hit the right lane, otherwise it's not really going to do anything. This makes it a lot easier to catch when contending for close locations while maintaining its purpose as an incentive to push power into play. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. This is a big nerf, so I really wonder if you're going to be seeing that much Allied. I still think in lockdown this is like for sure great, but in other decks like it's a lot harder to justify playing this comparatively if the payoff isn't as high. But maybe it's still going to be broken. My guess is it's still going to be played, but in the right decks, which is fair, honestly. Next up, we have Shuri nerf. I think this is fine, honestly. Shuri's been very good, even with the nerf. Shuri's just a hard card to balance, like realistically, unless you're like nerfing Red Skull where there isn't a big ceiling, right? But in the current climate, there is a ceiling that's pretty high. So putting 1 power out of it is like generally fine. You'll still be able to play most of the decks that Shuri does well in. And the difference between 6/4, 6/2, and 6/1 is not that crazy. Though it helps. It helps a little bit, but it's not the craziest change. While the Shuri type is often flirted with our threshold for balance, it hasn't emphatically crossed them for more than days at a time. However, it's been floating near the top for the last few months in internal data. We think that makes the deck ripe for a small nerf. Okay. A key element of the Shuri deck is often winning the lane in which the Shuri is played, which is true-ish because usually if you're playing Shuri into Red Skull, then you need to win that lane. Or if you're playing Shuri to Vision, then maybe not. But usually the harder matches are the Red Skull where you can't like deal with it, especially when they'll go like armor and stuff like that. So makes sense. So removing a power affects the archetype more than removing power in any other cards. I mean, I think there's a Red Skull nerf would probably be more damaging, but still makes sense. With the exception of Red Skull. Okay. All right. They good. We expect this change to pull Shuri down just a hair, ensuring these decks are mixed for the best decks, wearing the crown less more consistently. I'm generally fine with it. Shuri's like not the hardest deck to play as well, so it's fine to make it like a little bit easier to deal with. So, and it's not the greatest nerf, so I'm fine with this. I think this is okay. Next up, we have an interesting change. So Widow's Bite, or Black Widow's getting a buff. So the Widow's Bite itself is going from a 0/0 to a 0/1, 0 to a 0 -1. So that ends up being a buff because your opponent gets the Widow's Bite. So when you play, they lose a power. Now that's interesting in locations like bar with no name and things like that. But I think that's not that common, and if that happens, you'll know, right? And they have to play the Widow's Bite early, right? So it's not like you're going to be like, wow, they saved it till the last turn. They're not going to do that, and you'll know. So it's fine. So I think this is generally a pretty good buff, especially since sometimes when you're playing Black Widow, you want to get rid of it, you want to carnage it, or you want to just do something else with the card. So buffing the Bite is better than buffing the Black Widow. So I think this is a reasonable change. My thoughts here is that they're preparing for the junk meta, right? They have a Nihilist coming out soon. They're preparing for the junk meta, and they're like, wow, we have a Nihilist junk meta archetype, and we're not playing Black Widows in it. Let's buff Black Widow. I assume that's what's going on here. They're just like buffing for the next meta, so you buy the new cards. That's my thought process here, but I think it's fine anyways. Black Widow has lost a lot of play since Darkhawk has really gone down. Honestly, even in Darkhawk meta, it wasn't played as much after like the initial season. So, and you don't really play this in junk either a lot of the time. So it's just like it's not good enough. I feel so. This is why I'm okay with the buff. Black Widow has languished for a while, seeing the majority of us play months ago during the first Darkhawk Renaissance. Widow's a tricky card to improve because we don't want a metagame filled with Black Widows. Me either. Yeah, I think that would be toxic. But a bonus power seems doable. We'll see for now. We decided to plug it onto the Widow's Bite, which is a little worse than just adding power to Black Widow. Is it worse? I don't know if it's a worse. I mean, it's worse into some matchups for sure, right? Like it's worse into Destroy or anything with Carnage in it, right? But I don't know if it's I guess in a lot of games you're not going to be carnaging your Black Widow as well, so maybe it is a little bit worse. But better communicates the flavor of the bite and creates more interesting gameplay decisions about how to playing the bite might affect which players reveal first. Does it do that? I don't know. It's also slightly better if you're doing things like bouncing. Yeah, most people aren't bouncing Widow or destroying your own Black Widow. That one's more common to carnage it, which is the kind of synergy-driven gameplay we like to support. Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think this is maybe just to make this more of an option during the junk Nihilist meta, but still reasonable. Next up, we have the White Tiger is also getting a buff. This one is interesting to me because White Tiger is not a bad card. It's just a card that's hard to really justify in a lot of decks unless you're playing an Unreveal Wong Odin deck. Really, that's really where it jumps out. But with this change, like this card is good by itself. It makes me wonder if some people are going to play White Tiger in essence, like as a card. Like I could see it. I could see it for sure. Maybe instead of Black Panther, you play White Tiger now, because if you get two of them, like that's really good, and it's a good Odin target. I mean, if you're playing Black Panther, you're playing White Tiger anyway. So generally, I think White Tiger was in a weird spot where you could really only play in like specific decks, but with this change, it's a lot more appealing to me. So definitely wonder if you're going to see more White Tigers in the meta. So finally, the White Tiger is a fun card that's most frequently featured in early game combinations. I will say new players like White Tiger Odin is like insanely good now, right? If you're a new player. So that's definitely true. But the amount of power and board space didn't quite suit the card for higher level play, which is true. Like I think this might be a good Electro card now. Like you go Electro into White Tiger, like that's not bad. You could go Electro White Tiger, um, Doctor Doom Odin, right? Like that's just a board, like at that point. So that's something to do for sure. Um, we're adjusting the strength of White Tiger up notch because we like the bits of synergy white cards can have with Mr. Negative and Ravonna. Ravonna's interesting. I'm surprised that Ravonna hasn't been adjusted at all. Like I think its stats aren't super crazy, so I would have been interested to see. Maybe it'd be too good, but I would be interested to see how it looks in the metagame where it's a little bit cheaper or something like that. We prefer to maintain that as well as the gulf between where the card gets played and where the power ends up. This change would make White Tiger a more interesting consideration for more decks while moving it to the top of the metagame. I think that's fair. And it's definitely it definitely makes sense. You could definitely see that they're avoiding nerfing season pass cards, which I think from a profit standpoint just makes a lot of sense. But from a balance standpoint, makes less sense. But then again, you could argue for them profit is better than balance. At least initially, like during the season, then they balance. We can see Loki hasn't been adjusted at all. I still think Loki is like really good. Like not really good, but like very playable. And I would have changed his base power, but it's not that crazy in the meta right now. So like it's not a problem. So they look at the stats and say, oh yeah, look, he's fine, and it's just not being played, which is fair. It's just like, yeah. Maybe that's what's gonna happen to Elsa, right? Like the new season comes out and then it's just like there's just more things to do, better cards to play or funner cards to play, and then it's like, oh, the stats are fine. But yeah, definitely Loki's still really good, but not being trust. I still think it could deserve a nerf. Like buff collector nerf Loki personally, but whatever. It's not that big of a deal right now since it's not seeing play. But definitely still a strong card. Anyways, those are the changes we have for this patch. Overall, when we look through, like it's not a bad patch at all. I think there's a lot of good stuff here. White Tiger is good. Black Widow is good. Shuri is fine. Alioth deserved. Even though I think it might be like this might be a bit too much, but it's probably fine to see if how the play rate changes. It also makes this a lot better for negative decks, right? Like negative decks are gonna love this change for sure. And then Forge is fair. Like Forge was too good anyway. So I think all the changes are in the right direction. We got some buffs, we got some nerfs, and they make sense to me. So yeah, definitely fine with it. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Hope you guys like it, and we'll see you in the next one. Educated calling snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you to marvel snap.